You ever have one of those moments where someone walks onto your property and acts like you're the one trespassing? Well, that's exactly what happened to me the other weekend. I was out by the creek doing some clearing after the storm, just enjoying the quiet of my own land. That's when I heard it heels on gravel and a voice loud enough to scare off the deer. I turned around and there she was. Let's just say, the type of neighbor who thinks her opinion is the law. Karen. She stood there at the edge of the woods, hands on hips, demanding to know what I was doing on public land. I honestly thought she was joking at first, but no, she was dead serious. Told me she hikes these woods all the time and that the land belongs to the community. Now, I've lived here for nearly 15 years. I bought every acre from the creek all the way up to the ridge behind the pasture. My name's on every boundary line, every tax document, and every tree tagged for survey. But Karen, she wasn't having it. She waved her phone around like she was recording some big public land dispute, threatening to call the sheriff and file a complaint against me for being on my own land. Now, I'm usually calm, especially with folks who clearly don't understand how private property works. But when she stepped past the no trespassing sign and started pointing out where she thought the imaginary trail went, I knew this wasn't just a misunderstanding, it was going to be a problem. She wasn't interested in listening, only arguing. And the more I tried to explain, the louder she got. What she didn't know, though, was that I'd been keeping a paper trail. Deeds, maps, surveyor records. And I had someone on speed dial who knew that land better than anyone else. But before I could even get a word in, she did something that caught me completely off guard. Right when I was about to pull out my folder from the truck and show her the documents, Karen suddenly stepped forward, yanked out her phone, and started recording. She flipped the camera to selfie mode and began ranting about how some guy was threatening her on what she claimed was protected community land. I just stood there, stunned for a second, trying to process what was even happening. She was narrating this whole fake story like she was some kind of hero exposing a land dispute. "Look at this man," she said. "He's destroying nature for profit." I wasn't even cutting anything down, just clearing a fallen branch off. The trail I made. Now I know these woods like the back of my hand. I've walked that creek every season, marked the property lines myself with a licensed surveyor, and even built a small cabin up near the ridge for weekends. My grandfather taught me how to respect this land. I never imagined I'd have to defend owning it. But Karen? She was acting like she had some secret claim, like she'd discovered a hidden loophole and was about to turn the whole ridge into a hiking park for the neighborhood. She kept insisting that her friend from the local nature club told her these woods were part of some conservation corridor. I asked her to name the group, show a map, anything. She just waved it off and started walking deeper into the trees, ignoring every warning sign posted on the fence. I could feel my patience wearing thin, but I knew if I escalated, things would only get worse. So I decided to follow at a distance, just to make sure she didn't wander into the bluff behind the ridge. That drop's dangerous even in daylight. But what I found when I caught up with her, well, that changed everything. By the time I reached her, Karen had made it halfway up the slope near the old pine clearing. She was pacing around, muttering to herself, phone still in hand, pointing at every tree like she was conducting some kind of survey. I asked her again, calmly, to turn back. I reminded her that she was trespassing, that there were no public trails here, and that what she was doing could get her in real legal trouble. But she didn't care. She spun around, accusing me of gatekeeping nature, and said she had every right to explore her land. Her land. That's when I realized this wasn't about a misunderstanding. She believed this was hers, or at least that no one could stop her from acting like it was. That's when one of the subplots started to unravel. A few months back, I'd heard talk from my neighbor Ed about a local Facebook group organizing nature walks and posting open trail maps that weren't official. He said someone had been encouraging folks to go explore woods behind the ridge and ignore the old-timers trying to claim it all. I hadn't paid it much attention at the time, but now it all made sense. Karen wasn't just lost, she was led here. Someone, somewhere, was spreading the idea that this land was up for grabs, and she was acting on it. I started to wonder how many others had been wandering through thinking the same thing. How many people had passed by my trail cams or ignored the posted signs, assuming it was just public land that no one really cared about? And if this rumor was spreading, how long before someone else tried something worse? As Karen walked even further uphill, I noticed she was heading straight toward the hunting blind my cousin and I built last fall. That thing's tucked between two old oaks and isn't meant for guests. I quickened my pace to cut her off, but then I heard something up ahead. It wasn't her. It wasn't an animal either. It was a voice, and it wasn't mine. I froze. The voice came from just beyond the trees, low and firm, too steady to be someone out for a walk. Karen stopped too, just ahead of me, and for the first time since she showed up, she looked unsure. I motioned for her to stay where she was, but of course she ignored me and kept moving, calling out, "Hello? Who's there?" I hurried up. Behind her, heart racing, every step crunching through dry leaves like a warning. We stepped into the clearing near the blind and that's when we saw him. A man in camo stepped out from the shadow of the tree line, holding a pair of binoculars and a crossbow slung over his shoulder. Not threatening, but clearly not someone you wanted to surprise in the woods. It was Dale, a friend of mine and a licensed hunter who had permission to be on the land during season. He looked just as confused to see her as she was to see him. "Who's this?" he asked, eyes shifting between the two of us. Karen opened her mouth like she was about to give him the same speech she gave me. But I cut in fast. "She thinks this is public land," I said, trying to keep my voice calm. "She's been walking through since this morning. Says someone told her these woods were free to explore." Dale looked at her, then back at me, and said flatly, "You've had more people out here too. I've spotted hikers, a couple even. Tried setting up a campfire down by the lower trail last week. It hit me hard." So it wasn't just Karen, this was turning into a pattern. People wandering deeper into my land, guided by some rumor, or maybe even a made-up map, thinking they could use it however they wanted. Karen started to say something, but Dale raised a hand to stop her. "You need to leave now," he said, with that kind of quiet seriousness that makes people listen. But she didn't. She stood her ground and then reached for her phone again. That's when Dale took a step closer, and everything suddenly shifted. Karen took a step back as Dale moved forward, but instead of retreating, she suddenly blurted out, "I have permission to be here." Both of us froze. Dale raised an eyebrow. I stared at her, confused and honestly a little stunned. "Permission from who?" I asked, already knowing no one had the right to give it but me. She hesitated, then dug through her phone and pulled up a message thread. "A man named Greg," she said. "He's the president of our neighborhood's Green Space Committee. He told me and a few others this area was part of a future public trail expansion project and that it's not actively enforced." That name, Greg, hit like a punch in the gut. I knew him. He lived a few streets over in a newer development, the one that bordered my back ridge. We'd had words before when I denied a proposal to allow access to the creek from his side of the neighborhood. I didn't think much of it at the time, just some community guy pushing for extra perks. But now it looked like he'd gone and spread word that my land was basically unclaimed, that he had the power to open it UABP. My stomach dropped as I realized this might be bigger than Karen just wandering in. This could be organized. Dale looked over at me, clearly realizing the same thing. "That guy's been scouting from the ridge," he muttered. I saw him here last month taking photos. Said he was doing a survey for trail planning. Karen folded her arms like she felt vindicated. See, this land was going to be shared anyway. I'm just ahead of the curve. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. A neighbor was out here pretending to represent some fake land project, feeding people the idea that they had a right to my woods. I was no longer dealing with one trespasser, was dealing with something organized, something deliberate. And as I stared at Karen, still standing there like she belonged, I noticed movement against someone else was coming up the path behind us. The figure coming up the path moved fast, but steady. As they got closer, I recognized the familiar gray ball cap and clipboard tucked under one arm. It was Jeff, the county surveyor. I'd called him earlier that morning after spotting new orange ribbons tied to a few trees near the property line. I didn't expect him to show up this soon, but his timing couldn't have been better. Karen's smug expression shifted the moment she saw his badge and county logo on the truck parked down at the bend. Jeff didn't waste a second. "Is there a problem here?" he asked, eyes flicking between me, Karen, and Dale. I quickly filled him in what she said, what Greg had been doing, and how people had been treating the land like it was some kind of unofficial park. Jeff nodded slowly, then pulled out the rolled-up plat map from his case and unrolled it on the hood of his truck. He pointed at the clearly marked boundaries and said, "Everything from this ridge to the creek including that blind and the trail's 100% private property. No easements, no public access, and no authorized development proposals have ever been filed." Karen stepped forward, flustered, and showed him the messages from Greg, but Jeff barely glanced at them. "That's not how land development works," he said bluntly. "No citizen can give permission for others to use private land. This is trespassing." Dale crossed his arms, clearly holding back an "I told you so," while I just let out a breath I didn't realize I'd been holding. Karen mumbled something about being misled and started heading back down the trail, finally quiet for once. I thought that was the end of IT, till Jeff handed me a second map. "You're going to want to see this," he said. Turns out Greg's filed a request to have a utility easement rezoned right through the lower part of your woods. Stared at the paper, stunned. So this wasn't just about a nature walk. Greg had been laying groundwork for something bigger. And if I didn't act fast, this trespassing might just be the beginning of a much larger fight.